In today's lesson, we'll look at how to deal with questions that come at the end of your presentation. Many people do feel nervous about the questions at the end of a presentation, and that's very natural because there may be some questions that you feel that you can't answer. However, most questioners just want to ask a little bit of extra detail for something that you weren't able to cover in your presentation, and you should be able to answer that. In addition, you are probably the one that knows most about this topic in the room, so you should be confident that you can answer most questions that come up. It's very important to prepare for the question and answer session before the presentation. One way that you can do this is to think of a list of possible questions that audience members might ask. And then, of course, you practice answering them. Even if you get a question which is not exactly the same as your own list, you can probably still adapt, and your preparation will really help you in answering those questions. So what happens if a question is very difficult to answer? What would you do? Perhaps have a little think about that for a second. So preparation and practice should help you handle most questions, but sometimes you do get some very difficult situations. I'll try and give you some tips to handle these situations and give you some confidence that you don't have to panic when this happens. So the first strategy is actually when you feel you can answer the question, and what you might need to do is get a little bit of thinking time in order to help you answer the question. So one thing you can do is repeat the question. So you can say to the questioner, let me repeat your question. Or you could say something like, let me say your question so everybody can hear it. So for example, imagine the questioner says, what do you think is the best strategy for thinking time? And you could say, thank you for the question. Let me just repeat the question so everybody can hear it. What do you think is the best strategy for thinking time? And that gives you quite a lot of thinking time. The second situation is when you can't actually answer a difficult question and you need a number of different options. The first one is to get back to the questionnaire and compliment them on the fact that it's a good question. So just have a look at this language. It's a good question, but I do not have the answer at the moment. I will look it up and get back to you. So of course what you need to do is look up the answer and get back to that questioner. So you can either do that after the talk, or perhaps you can take their email or get in touch with them in some way or other. The underlined section, I will look it up and get back to you. That's a very useful phrase you can use in lots of different situations. Second piece of language you can use when you can't answer the question is the following. Again, compliment the questioner. It's a good question, but it is beyond the scope of today's presentation. Beyond the scope, the underlined section. Again, that's a very useful phrase. It's beyond the scope of today's talk. It's beyond the scope of today's meeting. It tells you that whatever the question was, it's kind of outside of what you were originally talking about. So that's a useful phrase to add to your vocabulary list. Here are a couple more phrases that could be useful to tell the person who's asked you a question that whatever it is they've asked, you can't deal with it. So unfortunately, we do not have time for it, or unfortunately, we cannot deal with it. Another strategy you might want to think about when you can't answer a question is to give the question back to the person who asked it, or ask the audience. Here's some language that might help you do that. It's a really good question. What do you think? And then you ask the person, or you ask the audience, and they give them a chance to give their opinion and divert a little bit of attention from yourself. We have been talking about questions that you feel that you can't answer. Another difficult situation, but not exactly the same, is when you get very long questions from the audience and they're taking up too much time. And what can you do to stop them talking? So, of course, it can be quite challenging to stop somebody talking. So it's really good if you can be as polite and warm as possible. Here's some language that may help you do that. So first of all, thank them. Oh, thank you. I'm really sorry, or I'm sorry to interrupt you, but as time is limited, do you have a question? Here's some more language that might help stop somebody speaking who's taking up a lot of time asking you a question or just giving their opinion. Sorry, but I'd like to invite other opinions. Does anyone else have a question? One final situation that I'd like to discuss is when you maybe have a difficult audience. Perhaps this is because you're talking about very sensitive topics which make some members of the audience a bit upset, or they could even be angry or rude. It's really important under these circumstances to keep calm and appear confident. So the kinds of meetings or presentations that you might have where people get a little bit difficult are perhaps when, for example, you have to explain to a local community that maybe there's going to be a new waste facility in their area. And of course, people are going to want to reject that idea. So that's the kind of situation I'm imagining for these sorts of responses. So if you do get people who are upset, one of the things you can do is have a 3-point response. Just have a look at the ideas here. So first of all, oh, thanks for your response. I can see it's a very important issue for you, and thanks for sharing so passionately. So those 3 parts are a thank you, and then an empathetic comment, so you can the other person feels that you understand them, and then another thank you. Another example of this 3-part framework when you're answering somebody who's being a little bit difficult is the following. Oh, thank you for the question. It's a sensitive topic and I'm sorry, but I'm not in a position to answer the question. So again, the 3 parts are a thank you. Hopefully number 2 is an empathetic comment, so the questionnaire feels that you do understand them. And then an apology that you can't answer at that time. So in sum, the question and answer session at the end of your presentation can be a very nervous time. However, if you practice hard, if you think of a list of questions before and practice answering them, then it can be a really satisfying way to end your presentation. And the audience can leave impressed with your insights and knowledge about the particular topic you were talking about. So, good luck for the question and answers, and practice hard.